Vice President.
Senator Ramkissoon.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Today we are here to debate, or the government has come before us to ask for a joint select committee to be established to consider the first and second reports of the committee established to review the levels of health care delivered by the RHA and to rationalize the system of public sector doctors in private practice. I have noted on the order paper, we have asked for a deadline no later than June 30th, 2017, which gives this committee roughly around 2 weeks working time. Is this correct, Mr. Vice President? I did not hear any amendments to it, or is it a typographical error? Because 2 weeks, Mr. Vice President, after looking at the reports and the content in the reports, I would expect the committee may have to ask for more time, and which now takes us into a new term. So maybe in the wrap-up, we could really probably talk about that, and I see the nod from the leader of government. Is it that it is a holding date of June 30th? And that's my first point. Now, I've listened to the introduction in the Senate this morning about the reasoning for the reports, the healthcare reports, and our post-existing public sector system, and the commitment by the government to correct or achieve a better system. And this is very commendable. But what I would have liked to hear more of was why would we like to refer these reports to a joint select committee? And this meaning a joint select committee of the Parliament. Because if you look at the reports, Mr. Vice President, you would see that a committee was formed to create these reports. And the Honorable Leader gave the names of these persons who served on this committee. So let me just tell you why I have asked this question. And if you all look at the first report, and it gives a nice summary that, for some background for those who are listening, by a cabinet letter dated in November 14, 2015, there was the request for a committee to review the levels of health care delivered by the RHAs and to rationalize the system of public sector doctors in private practice. And the committee consisted of 7 members. And I found that, yes, the Honorable Senator and Leader of Government said the names, but what really drew my attention was the qualifications of these persons who served on these committees. For example, the chairperson was the former medical director of Port of Spain Hospital. There was also Dr. Frederick, who was the president of the university in the U.S. Yes, Howard University, correct. There's also Professor Theodore, who served in the Center for Health Economics at UE. And it also had another doctor who served as administrator for clinical services, also at the Sandy Grande Hospital and the Eastern RHA, as well as the former president of Trinidad and Tobago Registered Nurses Association. They also had an executive medical director for the Southwest Regional Health Association. So these 7 persons was well qualified and in their remit to serve on these committees to make recommendations to us to say what amendments or what suggestions they have on our present healthcare system. And that is why I asked the question, why now are we going to ask parliamentarians to review these reports to give what? Because they have some recommendations, Mr. Vice President, that I found that should be policy. And I will draw my attention to that at a later in my debate. But I really found that these specialists in these areas are giving us recommendations that can serve in the Ministry of Health or serve as a policy for the Vision 2030. I'm not really sure what was the decision into why they would like to go this particular way with such a tight deadline. And I hope to learn that, because I didn't learn what was the reasoning. I did learn of the reason that yes, we have a suffering system, but not much attention was given. And Mr. Vice President, I looked at this report and they had such great findings of the report. And we're not here to debate the report, but there are some recommendations because this report was tailored for Trinidad and Tobago. And this report gave some specific suggestions that would serve the government well to implement now. And that is what I would like to share with the Senate and the listening audience at this time. Because they did say in their remit, Mr. Vice President, because they did look at several health institutions. They even convened meetings of staff, management, employees, interested parties, representative bodies. So they did their homework. Not only are they specialists, but they did their homework in the area of health as it affects Trinidad and Tobago today. And this report, as we said in the mandate, was November 2015, and as the motion said, it was laid in the Senate on November 15, 2016. So it's an updated report, and the recommendations has a lot of merit. Because, Mr. Vice President, they did share that they gave greater attention to the conclusions arrived in this report in areas of significant impact to Trinidad and Tobago. And they even explained what they meant by significant impact, because there's such a vast area that needs amendments, but they tailored their time and their efforts into concentrated areas. And Mr. Vice President, they made, well, I counted, and probably has some more, about 38 recommendations, this report before us. And that says a lot of the amount of work that was put into this. And again, this is the reasoning for why I'm saying at this time to go to a GSC for 38 recommendations to analyze, because we're asking the committee to review and analyze the reports. So I'm not exactly sure how they would be able to do this for 38 recommendations. Now, I did suggest, Mr. Vice President, that they look at implementing some of these recommendations because of the homework done in the report. And I would just want to share some of them quickly.
This point, as the motion is put forward, we're not going into the report itself. The motion speaks to the setup of a joint select committee. So I would caution you against going into the report or even reading out some of the recommendations. If you can move on to your next point and leave out the fact that you're going into the report, that would be fine.
Thank you for your guidance, Mr. Vice President. So I will not touch with the recommendations and just say that there are areas that they have identified that we can implement before going into any further work of the Parliament because of the merit in terms of the work that they have done and the amount of analysis this 7-member committee, along with the staff and different persons they have interviewed, that there is something that we can do now. I'm not sure if the government is not confident in these findings. Maybe that is it, and they could probably share that with us. Maybe they're not confident in the findings, or maybe it is monetary issues at this time that they cannot implement it. But we need to know, because to give a committee 2 weeks is not sufficient time for 38 recommendations. Another point that I wanted to raise was the report did talk about further work to be done. Now, I looked at the motion before us, Mr. Vice President, and there was no comment about looking at the further deliberations or further examination, and the report gave 16 points, right? And in the motion, you would see is to review and analyze the report, to consider the findings and recommendations contained in the report, and to report its observations and recommendations no later than June 30th, 2017. So that's why I'm asking this. The their work. That is the 7-member team that was set up by the cabinet for members of the public who are specialists in the field to do some work in the healthcare sector. Now, they have looked at the different recommendations as well as they identified 16 areas where further work would be done. But this was not put in the remit of the GSC. So I'm not sure if they would have to now form a new team, or maybe this goes back with just the remit of the line Minister of Health. Again, because I really think this could have just gone to the line Minister of the Ministry of Health, and they can have explored this. And I'm not exactly sure why we are going with the GSC. Mr. Vice President, there was another part of the analysis requested by the committee, and that was to look at the public sector doctors in private sector. And nothing is wrong with having a dual practice where public sector doctors can serve in private sector. But after reading the report, I have to say that I support the abolishment of private sector doctors serving in public sector, or the vice versa, public sector doctors serving in private sector, in the private sector, because of conflict of interests that may exist. Because the report even went into say examples where doctors give extra treatment to patients so they can come see them in their private sector practice. And that, unfortunately, is such a sad thing, because when this was created, it was never for the intention that this would be a secondary job, as in the private practice and public sector. They never thought that public sector work would now be their secondary point. And that is what is happening now. So there is something that I saw showing up with this particular committee work, and I did not really see this falling in the points, because there's only 3 points, because they didn't really recommend much in terms other than the abolishment. So again, I'm not sure how the committee is going to adapt this particular part of the work. That is, let me specify, that is to rationalize the system of public sector doctors in private practice. Now, Senator Amin, in her contribution, brought up the point about equipment failure in the public sector. And the report even went into that to say that many times the MRI scans and other specialized equipment does conveniently not work in the public sector, and private, when they recommend them to go to private sector, they are working and the public servants are there to serve the public. So we have now adapted a culture where we go first to the private sector. And that is not something that we have been trying to encourage. We are trying to build our public sector health, because the public sector is not just for the rich, but it's for any and every Trinidadian, poor and rich. And sometimes the private sector, only attracts one type of customer. And many times the citizens who can't afford goes into great debts, take loans, are very much inconvenienced. So these, I didn't really see much recommendations into this field, because it's a bad practice that we have adapted in our country. Now, I'm trying to be very cautious not to sway too much into the report as you have guided, and please just give me an indication if I'm overstepping, because I don't want any of these findings to be lost. And that have a high capability at this point, because we are at the end of our session, and because there's so much work that has been done, I don't want it to be lost, because I'm not seeing it, or I am not seeing it. It probably is there, where these recommendations that I'm pointing out can be captured if it does go to a GSC. And I hope that the Ministry of Health is taking note of these recommendations, if they have not already started to do that, and looked at the pros and cons to dual practice and what effects or impacts it will have to our country if we abolish public sector doctors serving in private sector. And the committee even went in to give a nice chart or table of how these doctors, coming in will serve. Okay, so let me just see if I have any points that will not touch in the areas that I would like to see. So, Mr. Vice President, the committee does not share with us if it would be looking at the efficiency or the effectiveness of these rationalization. They do speak about review and analyze reports, so I'm not sure if it will be captured there. So, for example, there is a point that they said that a particular sector was not efficient going this way, but it wasn't in terms of a recommendation. It was a finding, but not written as a finding. It was just written into the report as an observation by the committee. So there are a lot of observations in the committee report that I found wasn't listed as findings, but it was within the report, and I find that there would be a lot of merit to look at this report in great depth by the line ministry and see what areas they can correct immediately. Because there was mention that whilst they was having their public meetings, or maybe it's private meetings, maybe it's private consultations, that they did identify areas for correction, and whilst discussing it with the staff and management of the different facilities, the health sector facilities, they saw areas to correct immediately, and it was done. So the 7-member committee saw some great merits into having these discussions and consultations. So, Mr. Vice President, that's my point, is that there's some things that need just to be done immediately. It's a clear-cut report in terms of what they found, what is their analysis as it based to Trinidad and Tobago. And I shared the kind of qualifications and the kind of seniority of the members that served on this healthcare sector. I'm not saying that the parliamentarians don't have this level of experience, but I'm just saying that I found as a specialized committee there's much more that can be given than a parliamentarian committee of the whole or part of. So, Mr. Vice President, because I'm very afraid not to step into the remits of the report itself, I don't want to, and I would like to say that, is it that we are not confident in the workings by the Mr. Welch's reports, and we need more work to be done? Because the motion doesn't say that. Or is it that we like this just because this is one of the many reports the government would like to look at it in a holistic manner? And I'm just giving them an opportunity to share why we would like this, because at this point I don't see the need to go to a GSC. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Minister of Labour and Small Enterprises.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this very clear-cut matter before this August House. But before I do so, I would like to respond to certain statements made by my colleague, Senator Khadija Amin, and it really pains me to challenge my very dear friend Melissa Ramkissoon, who she knows I love her deeply. But you see, Mr. Vice President, when we come here to participate, we have to pay attention to the standing orders under which we operate. And the standing orders, Mr. Vice President, and this is precisely in response to my senatorial colleague, Senator Khadija Amin, when she made a very incorrect statement that I feel compelled to correct in the records of this House, that this government, and I quote, this government is abusing parliamentary privileges, and this government is attempting to postpone a decision on the doctors in the public health sector engaging in private practice. Mr. Vice President, that is furthest from the truth. I want to remind Senator Amin and others that the standing orders of this Senate, page 55, speaks clearly, Mr. Vice President, to the general functions of departmental joint select committees. And it states, in general, the functions of a department committee shall be A, examine bills and review all legislation, etc. B, investigate, inquire into, and report on all matters relating to the mandate, management activities, administration, and operations of the assigned ministries, departments, or bodies. It goes a little further, Mr. Vice President. C, study the program and policy objectives of ministries and departments, etc. D, assess and monitor the performance of ministries, departments, bodies, and the manner of exercise of those powers. E, investigate and inquire into all matters relating to the assigned ministries, departments, and bodies as they may deem necessary or may be referred to them by the House or the Minister. And F, make reports and recommendations to the House as often as possible, including recommendation on proposed legislation. So, Mr. Vice President, the point that this issue ought not to be referred to a joint select committee. The standing orders makes provision for matters like these to go to those joint select committee. Now, and I think I put paid to what my senatorial colleague was inferring or making a deliberate statement. I will deal a little later on with her point that this government does not want to take a decision with regards to doctors engaging in private practice while being in the public health sector. Mr. Vice President, what better way to engage in decision making but to ensure that the consultative approach is taken and that all representatives in this august chamber has an opportunity to participate towards governance in this country. And I will go further to say, Mr. Vice President, I want to remind my colleagues in this House, and in particular Senator Amin, to remind her that the GAFO report on the health sector, I think was 2007. It was the UNC that was calling for that report to go before a joint select committee. So what kind of message is being sent here? The GAFO report was on the health sector, and that was the call being made. And in 2017, we are being told that we are trying to escape our governmental responsibility. We are not trying to escape. We are broadening the consultative base, Mr. Vice President. And I want to remind, and I quote, the 13th report of the Joint Select Committee of Parliament on Ministries, Statutory Authorities, and State Enterprises, Group 2, on the commissioning process for the new Scarborough Hospital, Mr. Vice President. That went to Joint Select Committee. And Mr. Vice President, I want to remind my colleagues on the other side that Joint Select Committee, objective number 1, was to clarify the relationship between the Tobago Regional Health Authority and the Ministry of Tobago Development, the Tobago House of Assembly, and the Ministry of Health. Recommendation coming from the Joint Select Committee, and this was one of the recommendations. And that is what we are hoping to get out of the Joint Select Committee on this issue. And recommendation number 1 was, we recommend that urgent consultations be held at the managerial level to assess the accountability and reporting requirements of the Tobago Regional Health Authority to that of the Tobago House of Assembly, Ministry of Health, and the Ministry of Tobago Development with a view to resolving some of the existing ambiguity regarding the multiple authorities which exercise oversight of the TRHA. In the end, there must be clear and distinctive jurisdictional boundaries in respect of the three bodies exercising oversight. Mr. Vice President, a Joint Select Committee considered that issue. So what is wrong with a Joint Select Committee exercising oversight over this report? A fundamental report like this, Mr. I trust at the end of my contribution, I would have been able to persuade my colleagues that a Joint Select Committee on this report is a natural responsibility of this august House. Now, Mr. Vice President, I turn to my contribution on this issue. Our government, Mr. Vice President, recognizes and understands the importance of healthcare in Trinidad and Tobago. And thereby, once we are considering healthcare, it is an investment, Mr. Vice President, in the future of this country. Mr. Vice President, we need to also ensure a high level of healthcare for our citizens, which really should be enshrined in all of our health policies. I would like us to remember the definition of health as defined by the World Health Organization. And I quote, Mr. Vice President, "A state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity." What does this mean in practice, Mr. Vice President? It means that health is not only about health care. It is very much about being a complete sense of well-being. It is part about all the relevant policy areas, Mr. Vice President. Healthcare is critical in all spheres of life: political, the individual, and the collective. It is necessary for all of us, Mr. Vice President, not only us here in this House, but us as a collective, us as a people, to understand that when we speak about health, we speak about relatively healthy people and the need for those of us who are healthy to remain healthy, and those of us who are not so healthy to get on the track of becoming a little healthier. And this is why we need cooperation from all responsible actions, from all our stakeholders, from all of us here in this House, from individual patients, from the professional and the family care providers. Mr. Vice President, over the years, our health sector has faced a lot of challenges because of the complexities involved. We have new pressures such as an aging population, chronic illnesses, new diseases, and rapid development in health and technology. Further, Mr. Vice President, the new biochemical and technological developments are also being introduced in workplaces, some of which have some serious health implications for which we do not know how to meet and treat at this point in time in 2017. Mr. Vice President, it is therefore no surprise that our government has moved the efficient functioning of the healthcare system at a higher policy agenda level. We as a government, we are required to ensure that we have an effective, efficient, functioning healthcare system, especially within the context of reduced economic ability, Mr. Vice President. It is therefore imperative that as a people, we take stock of where we are at this present point in time and to identify what our future needs are likely to be in order to prepare ourselves to meet those challenges. Mr. Vice President, It is against this background, therefore, the reason dash for this government establishing the Mr. Welsh Committee in November 2015, to review the levels of healthcare delivery by regional health authorities and rationalize the system of public sector doctors in private practice. We heard my senatorial colleague, Melissa Ramkissoon, remind that the report contains some 60-odd recommendations. She's no longer in the House. But, Mr. Vice President, following the submission of the committee's report in August 2016, this government, in keeping with the Vision 2030's theme, which is delivering good governance and service excellence, is seeking to establish a joint select committee. And what are we asking this joint select committee to do, Mr. Vice President? One, to review and analyze the report, to consider the findings and recommendations contained in the report, and report its observations and recommendations no later than June 30th. Mr. Vice President, healthcare provision is changing rapidly, and those of us given the responsibility to take care of our people, those of us who want to have a better healthcare system, those of us who see the need for the provision of quality healthcare, how can we sit and make a statement that an important matter as this report ought not to attract the attention of a joint select committee? Mr. Vice President, understanding these linkages, the government of Trinidad and Tobago has included the concept of health and well-being of its citizens under theme 1 of the National Development Strategy Vision 2030, putting people first, nurturing our greatest asset. Mr. Vice President, theme 1, putting people first, nurturing our greatest assets, acknowledges that our citizens are central to our development. And in fact, those citizens are our greatest assets, and identifies that a society must be created in which all the basic needs are met, and each individual citizen is given the opportunity not only to contribute to the development of this country, but to engage in the self-actualization of their respective dreams. This means, therefore, Mr. Vice President, that we must attempt to eradicate poverty, inequity, discrimination, economic and social marginalization, disease, and poor health and substandard living conditions. The goals focusing on health in line with this theme include, Mr. Vice President, the following short-term goals. 1, the healthcare system will be sustainable and modern and deliver higher standards of healthcare. And 2, citizens will be empowered to lead healthy lifestyles. And Mr. Vice President, these two will then feed in to the medium-term goals, that the healthcare system will be efficient and provide quality services, and citizens will lead healthy lifestyle, which in turn will feed in to the long-term goal of all our citizens enjoying a healthy lifestyle. And Mr. Vice President, this is in line with the Sustainable Development Goals, which speaks to good health and well-being. I turn my attention now, Mr. Vice President, to the benefits of this Joint Select Committee, additional benefits. Mr. Vice President, given that this report will redound to the benefit of all stakeholders, it is put to this Honorable House that this process will result in the most efficient evaluation of the report. Why? Because a joint select committee is designed, Mr. Vice President, not to be partisan, but to be less partisan in its deliberations and can perform functions which the lower house themselves may not be so designed to do. The added benefit is that political old talk and ramage will be minimized because the committee in its natural construct is non-partisan, Mr. Vice President, and therefore would be able to focus at the task at hand. Mr. Vice President, the Joint Select Committee will comprise of representatives of those of us who sit in this August chambers with all good intentions, Mr. Vice President. None of us are seated here because we don't have real or we have bad intentions. We all have a good intentions to improve the quality of lives for Trinidad and Tobago. Since this report is highly technical, Mr. Vice President, any evaluation will require a high degree of specialized input. Mr. Vice President, and when you look around, we have all the specialized experts sitting right here in this August chambers. People whose focus, Dr. Mahabir is smiling. We don't always agree with some of his contribution, but by and large, he sets us on the right track in many instances, so that we don't have to look far. We have the expertise seated here, people who can get the job done. So, Mr. Vice President, we recognize that there is need for a paradigm shift in our healthcare system, specifically the way we allocate resources, strategize and operate our healthcare systems in this country. And the Joint Select Committee would be able to zero in. I have worked with Senator Small on parliamentary committees, and I always value his contribution, always pay attention to it. Even my friends, Senator Wade Mack, who I fondly call Chairman Mao, at the level, no, it's complimentary, and that's why we are smiling, because Chairman Mao wields a lot of power, and he knows that. At the level of our committee, it's non-partisan, and all members, Chairman Mao would tell you, at the level of that committee, I am influenced by his guidance, and any time that chairman makes a ruling and any member of that committee fails not to adhere to that committee, gets my full length of tongue, because I support the decision of my chairman on that committee, because when we sit at that level, it's non-partisan. And you see how my friend is smiling, he knows that, and he gets 100% support from myself. So, Mr. Vice President, I'm saying all this to say, the Joint Select Committee is the correct place for this report to go. Now, Mr. Vice President, we recognize that without healthy people, without well-functioning health systems, there can be no growth, there can be no economic success in any small developing nation like Trinidad and Tobago. As a consequence, therefore, Mr. Vice President, my government, our government is committed to delivering good governance and service excellence as articulated in the National Development Strategy Vision 2030, based on principles of participation and inclusion. How many times we have sat in this chamber, Mr. Vice President, and hear our colleagues complain that they're not being included. They want to participate. They want to have a say in the policy formulation of this country. I sat here stunned to hear my colleague, Senator Amin, accusing us of not wanting to govern. We are governing along the principle of participatory governance, Mr. Vice President. And I don't know how much more we can do. And all I can do is urge my friend, set aside your political focus and let's look at what is good for the country. It just may be, Mr. Vice President, that this Joint Select Committee may be able to zero in on certain weak areas in the reporting functions of this committee. This Joint Select Committee may be able to go further than where the Welch's report has gone, and may be able to raise certain issues and demand certain answers, Mr. Vice President. But you know what, Mr. Vice President? In the final analysis, it would be this Parliament making a very clear determination in terms of the health sector that all of us are aware needs some very serious reformation and some very serious action to be taken in the final analysis. Which better place for those decisions to be taken but here, the highest decision-making forum in Trinidad and Tobago. So then, Mr. Vice President, because this government believes in fair and transparent processes and prides itself in being a government accountable to the people of this blessed nation we call Trinidad and Tobago, we have put forward this process. This committee is entrusted with the careful review of the contents of the report. All of the deliberations and hearings of the committee will be made public. We agree at different parliamentary fora that because committee meetings can be viewed publicly, where various state enterprises have to come before these committees, that the public of Trinidad and Tobago has a clearer insight into what is happening, and therefore we get a direct feedback from the people, Mr. Vice President. The government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago recognizes that the quality of public health care services and the management of health institutions continue to be areas of grave concerns of the citizenry of this country. And which better way to identify and address those concerns but through a Joint Select Committee. Mr. Vice President, according to the Commission on Growth and Development led by Nobel laureate Mike Spence, 2001, and I quote, "Health is a direct source of human welfare and also an instrument for raising income levels." But Mr. Vice President, I will not go into all the data that came out of that situation. But I would want to close, Mr. Vice President, by pointing out the following. It is known that being employed is good for one's health and well-being, but it is increasingly being recognized that a healthy workforce is beneficial to employers also. By creating a positive, safe, and healthy environment for employees, you can actually increase the morale, improve your employees' work-life balance, and in turn that will impact positively on the business. That will give rise to a higher level of profits for the employer, which will redound in better pay packages for the workers. The obvious benefit of having a healthy workforce is that healthier employees are absent less often. You know, Mr. Vice President, it would be very interesting, not only interesting, it would assist us if a study is done to identify the cost or the value of absenteeism through illness, through health, lifestyles that are not healthy. It will prove very interesting because you see, Mr. Vice President, healthy workers are more motivated to stay on the job, to recover from sickness within a shorter time frame, and they are less at risk of long-term illnesses. Mr. Vice President, it is crucial that we as a people, we as Tringonians, that we build a healthcare system that would meet the multiple challenges that lie ahead. It is therefore necessary that we establish this committee to treat with this technical report in a consultative manner to the benefit of Trinidad and Tobago. Finally, I have no doubt, Mr. Vice President, that we would have an excellent set of policy prescriptions geared towards improving our nation's healthcare system with the work that would flow from this Joint Select Committee. And it is therefore against that background, Mr. Vice President, that I urge my senatorial colleagues to reconsider those who hold the view that this report ought not to go to the Joint Select Committee, to reconsider their position and the valuable inputs they themselves can make at this level to make this place a better place for all of us and for the next generation to come. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Senator Mark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. You know, Mr. Vice President, it is said that confession is good for the soul. And I want to tell you this evening that the motion before this Honorable Senate is a complete confession, if not genuflection, by this administration on their inability to deliver quality goods and services at affordable prices through the implementation and execution of effective policies to the population of the Republic of Toronto. I think this is a confession. I want to debunk, and I also want to completely rubbish some of the views that I've heard today. I must confess, as I'm on confession, that in the Joint Select Committee that I happen to lead, the PAEC, I joined with my colleague, the Honorable Minister of Labour, to say that we operate in a non-partisan fashion. I joined with her because she would have heard me on several occasions indicate to my colleagues that the taxpayer dollar has no party colors. And when we come to the Joint Select Committee, we come to do the people's business. So that is absolutely clear. But what is also absolutely clear, Mr. Vice President, is that when we come in plenary, as we do from quite often, this is where we are today, you know, we have to do what we have to do. We say what we have to say within the standing orders, because the responsibility of members of parliament, those in the government, they want to remain in government. So they will do everything to retain office. And they will argue in defense of their government's policies and programs. And those in opposition, as we are to expose and to criticize and to highlight deficiencies and to offer constructive alternatives in an effort to provide the people with a choice at the end of the exercise. We are not here to remain permanently in opposition. We are here to move with haste to get rid of the PNM as quickly as we can. That is what we are here to do. So we are not here to do anything else but to get rid of the PNM as quickly as possible. So I want to make that very clear, Mr. President. So I am not here, as I rise, to indicate to you, Mr. Vice President, that we have to appreciate, and as I'm on that point, let me deal with it one time. The Honorable Minister of Labour, Senator Baptiste-Primus, referred to Standing Order 91. and went on to outline the functions, the general functions of departmental joint select committees. And every function under this section of the standing orders addresses essentially, Mr. Vice President, activities of the executives or of the executive through ministries, agencies, statutory authorities, state entities, and of course, when they legislate bills, and we are responsible through the provisions in 91 to examine bills, to investigate matters relating to mandates of ministries, to study the programs and policies enunciated by ministries. We don't formulate policies for ministries. And Mr. Vice President, I just want to refer you to section 85(1) of the Constitution. And 85(1) of the Constitution speaks, and let me quote Mr. Vice President. 85(1) talks about ministers being assigned responsibility and for any ministry, any department of government, and those ministers shall exercise general direction and control over those departments and ministries. You know what that is? You know, when we talk about general direction and control, what that means? Policy. So the ministries, Mr. Vice President, they formulate policies.
Where's the minister?
And when they formulate policies, those policies are inquired into by the standing committees established by the Parliament. Because under 75(1) of the Constitution, the Cabinet is collectively accountable to the Parliament. So I think, we need to make it very clear that we are not here to engage in the formulation of policies. That is the domain of the executive. Even the honorable leader of government business is on record as saying over and over, listen, you disagree with us? That's fine. Don't obstruct us. We have 5 years. We must carry out, give us the responsibility. Let us be allowed to carry out policy. Let us carry out our responsibilities as a executive, as a cabinet, as a government. And if after 5 years the people are not happy, Mr. Vice President, then they can exercise their choice and their rights under the electoral system that we have here. So I think, Mr. Vice President, is either some of our colleagues are somewhat confused as to what their roles are and what our roles are. Mr. Vice President, may I also remind you and this honorable House that there are 4 essential functions of a parliament and our parliament. The first function is lawmaking. We make laws. The second function is we are responsible through our oversight role through the joint select committees, the joint standing committees, to bring the government, bring the executive to book through scrutiny and probity. That is our responsibility. So they are accountable to this Parliament for every decision, every action that they take on behalf of the citizen through policy. That is what we do. So that's the second function that we have to execute. The third function of the Parliament is representation. 41 members are elected in the House of Representatives, representing the views and the interests and the aspirations and the dreams of 1.4 million people. That is the role and function of a parliament, to give effective representation to the voices of 1.4 million people. And the last function we execute as a parliament is the supply of finance. That is what the budget debate is all about on an annual basis. Because without us approving the budget, Mr. Vice President, there can be no goods and services supplied to the people of this country. So we are responsible for approving the budget on an annual basis. Nowhere in any literature within the Commonwealth or outside of the Commonwealth would you see a parliament having the responsibility for formulating policy. Where is the function of a parliament as it relates to policy formulation and policy execution? That is the role of the cabinet. That is the role of the elected government. The government is here, Mr. Vice President, to execute policy and to not only execute, they formulate policy, and through the public service, they execute and they implement policies. So, Mr. Vice President, I thought I should deal with these matters up front so that you would know that when we come to this question of this particular resolution or motion, where the government is seeking to duck its responsibilities, they are trying to duck their responsibilities. And not only that, Mr. Vice President, I will show you as I proceed that the Joint Select Committee is a strategy being used by the PNM in order to entrap the opposition. So at the end of the day, they will share the blame.
Yes.
They will share the blame. So they want us to take responsibility for formulating policy and determining policy. And at the end of the day, Mr. Vice President, they will go out there and tell the population the opposition was responsible for X and Y. They took part. And look, Wade Mark's signature is here. He supported this. He supported that. He supported the other. So what they are doing, Mr. Vice President, as if we won yesterday or on last Sunday, they are trying to entrap us and using this approach to say, listen, like my good friend, it's like the last train to San Fernando, the honorable leader of government business said, listen, you have always been calling for involvement. You want to be part of policy formulation. You better hold on to this now. Snatch it now. Grab it now.
Take hold of it.
Giving us basket. But I want to tell you, the honorable leader of government business, you and your basket is porous. There's only holes in that basket. Because all the water pouring out. Because we are not going to take basket from this government. That is what you're trying to give us? Basket.
Poison fruit.
Yes, Mr. Vice President? So when we look at this exercise carefully, Mr. Vice President, it tells us, I want to remind the honorable leader of government business. Mr. Vice President, you see this? This is a report of the GAFU, Commission of Inquiry into Healthcare. This was 2004. They completed in 2007 under the late Mr. Patrick Manning, former Prime Minister. May his soul rest in peace. We implemented some during our period. Sure. We want you to implement the rest. The government, Mr. Vice President, should withdraw that motion that is before this House. You should withdraw this motion forthwith. Because that motion, Mr. Vice President, I'm saying all the work is contained here already.
Senator Mark, the picking up of the books, the visual aids,
This is not visual aids, this is books.
right, so when you pick it up and you direct it at the other side, it's a visual aid. So please refrain from doing that, just continue on with the points that you're making.
I am guided by you, sir. So what I'm saying, Mr. Vice President, the government, there is no need for the government to proceed with the Welch's reports and tell us that we must take part in this exercise. Mr. Vice President, I want to make it very clear that this government wants the opposition to share responsibility. They want us to take blame if things fail, so we can be held accountable by the people as they are going to be held accountable. But you know, Mr. Vice President, if you want the opposition to be responsible and to help you formulate policy, you have two choices facing you. Two choices. You share power with the opposition. You share power with the opposition 50%, 50%, or you get out of office and call fresh elections. You either share power or you get out of office and call fresh election so that we can become the next government and we can invite you to come with us. So don't come here, Mr. Vice President, and try to mama guy, as they would say, Mr. Vice President, the opposition, and tell us about we want to be part, we want you to hold on to this, grab it on. The honorable leader of government business, grab it, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I just wanted to let you know as well that this issue of the Joint Select Committee on this healthcare reports, Mr. Vice President, I do not know if you're aware. Mr. Vice President, I don't know if you're aware. If you go to Appendix 5 of our standing orders, and you go to subsection 1, you will see, Mr. Vice President, something called the Social Services and Public Administration Committee.
Yes.
It's a joint select committee, right, on social services and public administration. You know which ministries fall under and which subject matters fall under this particular JSC?
Read it slowly.
Let me read it slowly. Education. Health.
Health? What?
Health. Health, Mr. Vice President. So, Mr. Vice President, you have health, you have gender, you have tourism, you have public administration, you have labor, culture, community development, and other social services. Mr. Vice President, could you tell us here, or could the honorable leader of government business through you advise us, why is the government duplicating work? Mr. Vice President, you already have a standing committee dealing with social services and public administration. Why don't the government refer, Mr. Vice President, this report simply to that committee? I am on several of them. We also have, Mr. Vice President, 3 additional joint select committees. We have one on gambling and gaming. That's 15. We have one on cybercrime. 16. And we have the other one on insurance. 17. You now want to come and burden us with 2 other committees. One on health, and there's already a committee here dealing with health, and you want to, which I don't want to anticipate because it's coming up. So in all, Mr. Vice President, we are talking about we may be saddled with 19 committees, joint select committees. No, tell me something. All the cabinet members, parliamentary secretaries, ministers of state, their business fixed. They're well off. They get proper remuneration, full time. You know, we who have to come here and labor in the vineyard, Mr. Vice President, you know what happened, Mr. Vice President? We are not being remunerated like they are. So you want us to come and do work, Mr. Vice, and Mr. Vice President, not only the members of parliament who are backbenchers like us here in the opposition, but you know, Mr. Vice President, think about the staff. Think about the staff of parliament. They work in fact, the most professional group that we have in the whole of the public service in the Republic of TNT can be found right here in our parliament. The most professional group, Mr. Vice President.
The only thing we agree with you on is that.
Yes, and I'm very grateful. Right, very grateful. So, Mr. Vice President, what about the staffers? Where are they going to find the time? Are they not humans too? Mr. Vice President, I want to tell you something. This regime is so disorganized. So disorganized. They are almost dysfunctional. Mr. Vice President, would you believe that as far as we are concerned, how can you come and seek to introduce 2 new joint select committees when you know you already have 17 in existence? And Mr. Vice President, you know what is even worse?
You don't have 17 in existence.
You have 14 standing and you have 3 that is working right now. Gambling and gaming, insurance and cybercrime. And then you have 2 more, add to that, 19. Mr. Vice President, you know what is even more difficult to endure? Most of those committees, a number of those committees that they want to establish here now, all are going to be chaired by a government minister. So, Mr. Vice President, let's say we go with a minimum of 8 members. It would be 5, it would be 2 from the opposition and 1 independent chaired by the government. So the chairman of the Committee on Education, on Health Care, will be a government minister or a government member. And as you know, Mr. Vice President, most of these committees that do not have independent senators chairing them, once they are established to do specific work in terms of bills, or in this instance where the government is seeking to send reports, they are going to be chaired by government ministers who don't have the time. They don't have the time, but they're asking for more work. Where are they going to find the time to function to do that kind of work? They can't find the time, Mr. Vice President. And I want to tell you, Mr. Vice President, that the former Prime Minister, who has now passed on, and I don't know if it's a strategy of this one, because the Honorable Leader made it very clear to us a short while ago that this came directly from the office of the Prime Minister to form this committee, to establish this committee. It didn't come from the Ministry of Health or to the Minister of Health. It came directly from the office of the Prime Minister. I want to advise Mr. Vice President that the last time a Prime Minister established a commission of inquiry into health care in this country, the Minister of Health was fired after that. That one fellow called John Rahel. He was the Minister of Health. And the Patrick Manning government wanted to get rid of him. So they established a commission of inquiry into health. So I don't know if the strategy is to get rid of DRC. I don't know if the strategy is to get rid of the Member of Parliament for St. Joseph, now the current Minister of Health. No, I don't know. I'm just asking. Mr. Vice President, I don't know. I don't know if there's a strategy on their part. Mr. Vice President. Mr.
Reshuffle coming in, Prime Minister said so. That coming out of a bottle like sorry, Mr. Vice President.
Senator Amin. Minister. Thank you. Continue, Senator Ma.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I just want to go back to another point that my good friend raised earlier. That is the Honorable Leader of Government Business. He stated, and I quote, this government, that is the PNM government, is committed to transparency. And that is why on Wednesday, which is tomorrow, the master gas plan, or the gas master plan, whatever you call it, will be laid. And that's the first time, and they committed to transparency. I want to ask the Minister, the Honorable Leader of Government Business, there's a group. We have been asking for the documentation that gave that group the power to represent Trinidad and Tobago in a place called Washington, D.C., on Capitol Hill. The name of the group is Group DC LLC, led by a fellow called Arthur R. Collins. We have been asking the government, and they talk about transparency and accountability, we have been asking them to table in this parliament all the documents, all the papers establishing that particular agency led by this chap called Arthur Collins. You know, this time, Mr. Vice President, we are yet to get...
Point of order. 46-1.
Senator, on the point of order, I would ask that you just rein it in a bit and keep it in terms of the motion that we have before us.
Mr. Vice President, I'm just responding to the concept of transparency that was raised by my honorable friend. And I was just simply saying that one of the things that we have been asking for in terms of transparency is the tabling of all the documents. Mr. Vice President, you know why I am raising this point, Mr. Vice President? It's $2.4 million US, which is worth $16 million that they have given to this firm. And we have no documentation on this matter. Sorry, Mr. Vice President.
Okay, Senator. I've just ruled on the point of order regarding relevance. So I would ask you to bring it right back to the motion before us now in regards to the setup of the Joint Select Committee in relation to the two reports that have been put forward. So can you, moving forward, bring it in?
So Mr. Vice President, I want to get back to the Welsh, because as you said, we cannot deal with the contents of the report, which, you know, in a quiet moment, I'll discuss it with you. Because it's very difficult, Mr. Vice President, to speak without making reference. But I am guided by your ruling. Mr. Vice President, on a broad basis, when I examined that report, a number of the issues raised in that report were rooted in managerial challenges. And Mr. Vice President, all we need to do is to engage in proper management, and the health sector would be running smoothly and efficiently. We had challenges too. We had challenges. So what I'm saying, Mr. Vice President, is the Welsh Committee report deals more with managerial issues confronting the health sector. That is what I am suggesting, and not necessarily...
Minister, could you just please allow this honourable senator to make his contribution? The crosstalk is actually getting loud, and I think it's interrupting the proceedings.
I know that the honorable minister has a weakness for me.
She admitted that.
She has a weakness for me. So I have no problem. I welcome her with open arms. I welcome her with open arms. She doesn't disturb me, right? I want to tell you that. I love her too. She loves me, I love her.
Senator.
And we love each other. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You're quite helpful. Oh, oh my God! You see why that she loves me.
Members, that is not called for. Can we just temper the level of crosstalk and the words that we are using? Senator, continue.
Yes, as I tell you, she has a weakness. So, Mr. Vice President, may I continue? So, Mr. Vice President, I was making the point that the government of Trinidad and Tobago does not want to take responsibility for anything. They blame everybody. My heart and my prayers go out to Father Clyde Harvey for what has happened to him yesterday or the day before. Yes. But when I listen to the Prime Minister's response, where he's blaming parents.
Senator, the comments that you're making now does not tie in with the motion that we have. So again, could you move away from that point and bring it back to the motion that is before us?
I am dealing with, Mr. Vice President, I am guided by you. I'm saying that, for instance, the government has to take responsibility. Do not come to this parliament, do not come to this Senate and try to place on our back a burden that you should be carrying. When we were there between 2010 and 2015, the burden was on our back and we carried it out. We didn't say we want to start. Mr. Vice President, the same books that I raised and you guided me on, these books that I'm touching here, because I can't raise them, they are too heavy for me now. These same books that were via report, Mr. Vice President, that were submitted to the former Prime Minister, he did not send that to a Joint Select Committee. Mr. Manning had the wisdom to implement these recommendations. He proceeded to try to implement those recommendations. Why is the government of Trinidad and Tobago seeking to burden us with its responsibilities? Listen, you are in charge. The people give you a mandate temporarily.
Red and ready.
You were red and ready. Why are you subcontracting out your job? Why are you subcontracting out your job and your services, Mr. Vice President? So they want us to be part of it. Look, Mr. Vice President, we will not accept that. We do not want to be part of any arrangement. And until, Mr. Vice President, there is meaningful constitutional reform in this country, until we have effective and meaningful parliamentary independence and autonomy, where we can have more power to put the executive under scrutiny and probity. Mr. Vice President, until members of parliament, everyone, are full-time and they are paid appropriately, and until there are changes to the Constitution that gives the Parliament a new power and responsibility to formulate policy, we are going to stick to our mandate, which is lawmaking, which is oversight, which is supplying finance and representation. That is our mandate, and we must stick to it. And the government cannot force on us a new mandate. Mr. Vice President, this should be referred to an interministerial committee. This report that we have before us, that they want to send to a JSC, that should go to an interministerial committee. And let that interministerial committee oversee its implementation of the recommendations. And whether they want to get rid of private doctors who are in the public sector, and they say there's a conflict of interest, and they need to take legislative action to rectify that, let them take that. Why they want us to be part of that decision making? If the government want to get rid of doctors who
Senator, you have 5 more minutes.
yeah, if the government wishes to get rid of the doctors who are in the public sector and engage in private practice that you consider to be a conflict of interest.
Point of order, Mr. Vice President, 46-1. The report never said that they want to get rid of the doctors. Don't say that now.
Minister. Senator Mark, again, you're talking about the setting up a joint select committee in relation to the reports. In relation to getting into the report or anything that may or may not have been said in the report, just stay away from quoting or referencing the report.
So, Mr. Vice President, I would say that the Parliament should not be burdened with the creation of another JSC to deal with government work. This is government work. Government should do their work. They have set up the Welsh Committee, as they have set up a committee on petrotrin. They have set up a committee on education. Those reports, when they come to the cabinet, they must implement those reports or reject those reports. Do not come to the Parliament and seek to get us involved in that. And I want to tell you, Mr. Vice President, in any event, if the government wishes to refer that report to a committee, I am saying you don't have to create a new one. There's already one in existence. Just refer the report and they will look at it. And they'll probably tell them what they think about it at the end of the day. And you don't have to create a new one. Mr. Vice President, I need to tell you that when you talk about the creation of a new JSC, think about the Parliament. Think about the office of the Parliament. Think about the office of the Parliament in the context of resources, in the context of personnel, in the context of poorly paid staff, in the context of poorly paid parliamentarians who are non-full-time. You have to think about all these things. But we understand from the Honorable Senator Paula Gopee-Scoon that the Prime Minister told her, because that's what she told us at the last, when we deal with parliamentary autonomy, that there'll be no, Dr. Rowley has indicated, or the Honorable Prime Minister has indicated, there will be no salary increases. I never knew he had such power. I thought that was the power of the SRC. Subject to cabinet. Well, no, subject to here. Because cabinet had to bring it here.
And you know that's the way you're accusing them of doing it.
No, I'm saying that, no, I'm just making a point. No, not Kutru. So, Mr. Vice President, we cannot and we do not support this. We want no part in this exercise. My only duty and our only duty is to move swiftly and rapidly to get rid of this albatross around the necks of the people called the PNM. As soon as we can do that, the sooner we can do that, the better. We have no other interest but to get rid of this regime as soon as possible. And we are not interested in taking part in any JSC involving, for instance, this JSC, just JSC. You are seeking to impose. No, I am correcting myself. Not
Point of order. Point
I'm
of
talking
order.
about those
51-1 E, F, and G, the running commentary, Mr. Vice President.
Honourable Senator, you have about a minute left. As for the the running commentary that the point of order has been raised on, I would ask that you tone it down a bit. Honourable Senator, finish.
Yes, well, Mr. Vice President, I must thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to make my contribution today. Thank you very much.
Senator Mahabir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. I rather suspect that my own contribution will generate a little less crosstalk than the earlier one. Mr. Vice President, I would like to just read the first line of the motion. Be it resolved that a joint select committee be established to consider the first report of the committee established to review the levels of healthcare delivery and so on. And I would like to pose a question as to whether there is a need to establish a joint select committee. And second, under sub-article C, report its observations and recommendations no later than June the 30th, 2017. That is unrealistic, and I don't think it is going to do justice to the report that is before us. But when I read the first line of the motion, Mr. Vice President, I asked myself whether there really is, as my colleague Senator Mark alluded to, a need to establish a joint select committee. And Mr. Vice President, like my colleague Minister Senator Jennifer Baptiste-Primus, I too would like to refer this Honorable House to Standing Order 91, General Functions of Departmental Joint Select Committees. Under 91C, it says, in general, the functions of a departmental committee shall be to C, study the program and policy objectives of ministries, departments or bodies, and the effectiveness of the implementation. So there is provisions in the standing orders for a departmental joint select committee to study the program and policy objectives of ministries. And under 191(1)(e), it says, in general, the functions of a departmental committee shall be to E, investigate and inquire into all matters relating to the assigned ministries, departments and bodies as they may deem necessary, or, and my emphasis here, or as may be referred to them by the House or a minister. The departmental committees, when we look at Appendix 5, are National Security, Energy Affairs, Foreign Affairs, and under the following omnibus committees, Omnibus Committee number 3, Social Services and Public Administration, to which I will refer. So the standing orders are very clear with respect to the remit of the committees. And the question I ask myself is, has a similar situation arisen before? Or is this the first time the Parliament has been asked to consider a matter that has been referred to a joint select committee by the executive? I want to refer to page 56 under Standing Order 95, the Committee on Foreign Affairs, of which I was, when it was first constituted, the chairman. It was the chairmanship then moved to a government member at a subsequent occasion, but the Honorable Senator Gopi-Skoon was a member then, is, I understand, a member now. But the Committee on Foreign Affairs shall have the duty of considering from time to time and reporting whenever necessary on other matters relating to foreign affairs as may be referred to it by the House. What occurred, and it's on the record, is that a report on the COTED, that is the committee that was established by the CARICOM Secretariat to look at further integration of the CARICOM Common Market was referred to the Committee on Foreign Affairs for its deliberations and then to report to the House with respect to its findings. So that the standing orders do provide for the matters affecting the executive branch of government to be referred to it so that there could be deliberations at the committee level and then a report is duly made. When I therefore examined the departmental committees would include National Security, Energy, Foreign Affairs, and under 3, Social Services and Public Administration, to include Education, Health, Gender, Tourism, Public Administration, Labor, Culture, Community Development, and other social services. So, to emphasize a point raised by Senator Mark, is there a need, coming back to the motion, to establish a joint select committee to look at the report on the health sector, and in particular on whether doctors should be both employed in the private sector and in the government sector, or whether this matter should not be referred to the Committee on Social Services, which is charged with examining matters in relation to healthcare. And the procedure is a straightforward one. All that is required is for a minister to simply refer the matter to the Joint Select Committee on Social Services, of which I am the chairman. We have Senator Amin as a member, we have Senator Lewis as a member, Senator Rohan Sinanan as a member from this chamber, and we have members in the other place. So it is a Joint Select Committee, omnibus committee, and simply refer to the Secretariat the desire of the executive branch of government for the committee to look at that. And the convention has always been, Mr. Vice President, that whenever a request is made coming from the House or a minister or the executive branch to look at a matter, a discussion is ensued and members set aside the agenda. They would complete ongoing work and they will focus on this particular matter as a matter of priority, and they will report on it after taking the evidence, public evidence, open hearings, and a report will then dutifully be filed. So I ask myself whether there is really a need, given, as Senator Mark alluded, that there are some 19 or 20 committees, and we set up a select committee this morning, given the limited resources of the Parliament, given the fact that the time is unrealistic, we can't look, and Senator Ramkissoon is right. The committee itself was made up of technical specialists in their field, and we are being asked to set up a new joint select committee and to report in a couple of weeks in the context and in the confines that we have. So my own recommendation is that we simply refer this matter to the committee which has the responsibility for it, Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration. The procedure is spelled out in the standing orders. A minister, the Minister of Health, or the leader of government business in the House refers it to us. We deliberate upon it, and the members are already in existence. There is no need to pass any further motion as to who will sit on this committee. The members of the Joint Select Committee are already in existence, and it then becomes part of the work program that is the ongoing work of the Committee on Social Services and Public Administration. Mr. Vice President, I think the whole issue, has already been dealt with. The standing orders are very clear. The remit of the Committee of Social Services is very well defined. This falls within the work program, and therefore I would recommend that we do not add to do another committee to duplicate the work of an existing committee. We simply refer this matter to the existing Committee on Social Services and Public Administration, and the committee as a joint select committee will duly deliberate and present its findings as it has been doing over the last 2 sessions in the Parliament. Mr. Vice President, I thank you.
Leader of Government Business?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I listened attentively to the contributions of all the senators who participated in this debate. First and foremost, I want to say the executive and the cabinet, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, is not abdicating its responsibility when it comes in terms of policy formulation and policy implementation and the governance of Trinidad and Tobago. But there are a couple of things we need to understand. There are certain, what I call, seminal reports that doesn't fall under the run-of-the-mill definition. Seminal reports, the Welsh report, the Gas Master Plan, Vision 2030, which we will deal with later on, so I don't want to prejudge what would happen there. These seminal reports, one of the things that members need to understand is that when a document is laid in the Parliament, it becomes a public document. And by that action only, it is good for governance. Okay, so it now becomes a publicly accessible document. Secondly, I am surprised to hear the thinking now of some of the senators, in particular the opposition bench. Because it's like you want to have your cake and eat it, you know. You have been clamoring all the time and say everything must go to joint select. No. You're clamoring all the time to say there should be more consultation. Okay? You're clamoring that there's supposed to be a more bipartisan or non-partisan approach to governance. And here we are saying, let us table this seminal report from the Welsh Committee on health. Health is a major challenge. We all know health is a major challenge. And we have come to this Parliament with a document which states that it is proposing recommendations, it is proposing solutions, it is dealing at some key fundamental issues which the Vice President has ruled not to go into at this point in time. But that calls for consultation. And another thing people, some of the senators mentioned, that is a highly specialized document. It is a committee of experts, yes. It is a health sector, a healthcare report, yes. The Gas Master Plan is an expert report on energy. But at the end of the day, through you, Mr. Vice President, it is public policy. And this is the forum for public policy. You don't have to be an expert to participate in public policy. Because public policy goes beyond the hardcore technocratic, to use the AG's phrase, concepts that will be articulated in the report. Because public policy goes beyond that. Public policy goes at how it relates to the poor man, how it relates to the institutions of government, how it relates to all the stakeholders in the society. So health policy, public policy, as it relates to health, is not in the strict domain of the health caregivers. It is in the domain of the health care receivers. It is in the domain of the insurance companies. It is in the domain of every single citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, because health and education is probably the two most fundamental aspects of government. I always say, if you don't get health right, you don't get education right, you stand a good chance not to form the next administration. Because that is where you touch every single life in Trinidad and Tobago. And why wouldn't the Senate and why wouldn't the House of Representatives want to participate? You're not going to say that Dr. Welch talking nonsense about recommendation A, B, C, and D, because probably may not be qualified to so adjudicate. But obviously, as public policy people, you will be qualified to say, I see another angle in this, which you couldn't see because you have the blinkers of a doctor, or you have the blinkers of a nurse, or you have the blinkers of a hospital administration. But there are other aspects to healthcare policy. And that is the context in which we brought this to the Parliament. It is no ulterior motive to say we abdicate in our responsibility for governance, and how I always say, give us a chance to govern because we are the executive. We are the executive, and we will govern to the best of our ability. But for heaven's sake, to you, Mr. Vice President, let us be real. Let us come to the dance as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Yes. And let us come together and participate and contribute. Because that is where your greatest value are. Your value is, as senators, to contribute. When you debate on legislation, whether you oppose the legislation is eventually voted into law. The fact of the matter is, the Hansard will record your contribution. And that is all you can do as representative of the people, Because this is where public policy is formulated. And public policy represents the people. We represent the people on this side. The opposition represent the people on this side. And you on the independent bench also represent the people. Because in a democracy, the people is paramount. And in that context, and that context only, I think we should support this motion of sending the Welch report, a seminal report on the health sector. Probably even superseding the Gafu Commission of Inquiry, because that was a commission of inquiry, which has a different type of mandate to a report, to drill down into the health sector, see what the challenges are, and come up with meaningful solutions. I remember as a young man, since Kamaluddin Mohammed was Minister of Health, we have challenges in the health system. We've built hospitals. We've built Mount Hope. We've built the Kuva Hospital, and it will be open shortly. Good. We are building, as we speak, the Arima Hospital for $1.something billion. The Point Fortin Hospital for $1.something billion. We've been pumping $6 to $7 billion a year in the health sector. And still drugs are short. Still there's a waiting time for beds.
Yes. Thank you, Honorable Minister, for giving way. I am in total agreement with everything you are saying. What I am unclear about, Senator, is this. What is the problem with respect to referring this particular Welch report to the Committee of Social Services and Public Administration, which has been constituted to address just matters like these?
I will leave it at shortly. So I hope senators, through you, Mr. Vice President, understand the context in which we are coming from. But I am, for one person, serious about governance. I hope you all realize that. And we have to start to take this country down the right track. And when I speak later on Vision 2020, I'll show you certain things, not prejudging anything. So I really put forward the case that this Joint Select Committee, Special Joint Select Committee, is well thought through. And let me deal with Senator Dhanayshar Mahabir. There are several Joint Select Committee. There are the Special Select Committees, which is what we are proposing here. There are the standing joint select committees, which have been long-standing. And then the new kid in tongue, based on the new standing orders, are the departmental joint select committee. We have gone the way of a special select committee because we felt this report is so important that we should pull it out and give it a status on its own. And by setting up a special select committee, you can give it a deadline and say we want it to report by then so that the parliament could consider its recommendation. So it doesn't get lost in the run-of-the-mill things that goes into the departmental joint select committees, where it has its own agenda set up, and we don't want to usurp that agenda. And to deal with Senator Ramkissoon's point that about the timing, from our consultation with the clerk, with the parliamentary staff, I should say, we know that is an unrealistic time frame. The intent there is that the committee will meet, just prepare a brief interim report, and come back to the House asking for an extension so that it will survive the recess and the prorogation of Parliament. If it is not done that way, it would not survive the prorogation. So that is the only intent, and then you will set on your own a new deadline as to when you want to submit the report, whether it is in July or August or what have you. So, Mr. Vice President, it would be remiss of me if I don't deal with Senator Mark, because
Comprehensively.
he's a character, to say the least. And as a scientist, I deal with algorithms and trying to set up correlation among cause and effect. And anytime I see Senator Mark come with the shirt jack, I know watch it. When he comes with his business attire, I know he's in a different mood. So I know that I will face aggression when he comes with his trade union outfit. Okay, and I expect that. Okay? So, but by and large, what Senator Mark is saying that we as a government is abdicating our responsibility. We have traditionally come through the Westminster system. The Westminster system is adversarial. We know that. But at the level of the Senate, I think we could be more collaborative. We could be more bipartisan. We could be more non-partisan. Okay? Because this is why, you see, the British knew what they were doing, you know. Because they have the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Because what they say, let the adversary rhetoric take place in the House of Representatives. But when you come to the House of Lords, while you still expect certain aspects of that, we have to elevate ourselves into dealing with the key issues. Okay? And while the politics will always continue to play a part in Trinidad and Tobago, because at the end of the day, we contest election under the Westminster system in situations of key public policy. Again, and I will talk certain things about public policy in the next motion. On matters of key public policy, there needs to be buy-in, there needs to be consensus building. And there's no better way in the parliamentary system to get buy-in and to get consensus building than the process of a joint select committee. So, Mr. Vice President, through you, I hope I have articulated the cause of this government coming to joint select committee to study the Welsh report and to make recommendations there too. I hope I have been convincing in my closing remarks. And with these few words, Mr. Vice President, I beg.
Honourable Senators, the question is, be it resolved that a joint select committee be established to consider the first report of the committee established to review the levels of healthcare delivery by the regional health authorities and to rationalize the system of public sector doctors in private practice, as well as the second report of the committee to review the levels of healthcare delivery by the regional health authorities and to rationalize the system of public sector doctors in private practice laid in the Senate on November the 15th, 2016 and March 28, 2017 respectively. And be it further resolved that this committee be mandated to A, review and analyze the reports, B, consider the findings and recommendations contained in the reports, and C, report its observations and recommendations no later than June 30th, 2017. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The motion has been approved. Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Vice President, I move that we defer the naming of the members of the committee to a time later in the sitting.
Honourable members, the naming of the members of the committee will be so deferred until later on in the proceedings. Leader of Government Business, motion number 2.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I beg to move that the following motion standing in my name. Whereas the draft National Development Strategy 2016 to 2030, Vision 2030, was laid in the Senate on April 25, 2017, and in the House of Representatives on April 21, 2017. Be it resolved that a joint select committee be established to consider the draft National Development Strategy 2016 to 2030, Vision 2030. And be it further resolved that this joint select committee be mandated to A, review and analyze the draft National Development Strategy 2016 to 2030, Vision 2030. B, consider the recommendations contained in the draft National Development Strategy 2016 to 2030, also called Vision 2030. And C, report its recommendations for the development of a national development plan no later than June 21st, 2017. Mr. Vice President, I move this motion today with a deep sense of regret and sadness. Because, Mr. Vice President, Vision 2030 has now replaced Vision 2020. And hear me out. The year 2015 to 2020 should have been the last leg of the relay to develop country status. Because the Vision 2020 plan was to make Trinidad and Tobago a developed country by the year 2020. Today, we are now forced to include 2 additional legs in the race. The leg from 2020 to 2025 and the leg from 2025 to 2030. Why? Because there was no continuity of policy. That's what developed countries is all about, you know. And there was no continuity. Because as a society, we are not matured enough to understand the fundamentals of national development. I will deal with that. But Mr. Vice President, I will hold up 2 documents here. It's not as heavy as Senator Marks, so I hope you permit me. But I just want to let this Senate know, and especially the young senators, the independents in particular, that the PNM has literally written and charted the economic and social history of Trinidad and Tobago. I say that without any fear of contradiction. This is the first document that was prepared by Dr. Williams, the People's Charter, adopted by the inaugural conference of the movement on Sunday, January 15, 1956. The People's Charter. I know I promised you all a lot of documents, but I will make this copy available, especially to my young by young independent senators and anybody
You
else.
want it.
A seminal document that analyzed the anti-colonial movement and the developmental history that took us through to independence, and charted the course for the Trinidadian and especially the people of African and East Indian descent to stamp the authority and their presence in Trinidad and Tobago in a post-colonial society. And then came 1970, the Chaguaramas Declaration.
You send that too.
And the Chaguaramas Declaration, to show you how we were evolving and how Dr. Williams was evolving. It was approved at a special convention at the Chaguaramas Convention Center in November 1970. It came after the uprising of the Black Power movement, where the then leader of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Williams, had to recast his model of development to suit the new changing reality, the new normal at the time of the 1970s. Senator Chris, very familiar with that period. Good? Yes.
Leader of Government, in the interest of fairness, the brandishing of the document, the visual aids, I would allow equal amount of time with Senator Mark when he brandished his, but I give fair warning to each and every member in regards to the visual aids.
I'll be so guided. And that was the Williams era. There's a document called The Imperatives of Adjustment that came out of the Chambers era. That he started the formulation of structural adjustment. He liberalized the manufacturing sector. And he started to disband what was the negative list at the time and all these good economic policy. But we're not delving into the core concept of economic policy today. And then came the Manning era, a document called Perspective of the 1980s and Beyond, when Manning took over the PNM in 1986, 87. And then the PNM is at its best when we're in opposition and we're preparing for government. Yeah. Because a lot of the key policy formulation comes through that era. Because we don't sit down and lie, you know.
That's right.
We know we do not sit down and lie, we prepare ourselves. Because when you see, Mr. Vice President, when you are a sitting government and you lose office, the first thing you have to admit, as a sincere organization, as the People's National Movement it is what went wrong. Because if nothing had gone wrong, you would not have been out of office. So we always do introspection, you know. We don't bury our heads in the sand, you know. We always do introspection and see, what did we do wrong? Where did we not engage the people as they were supposed to be engaged? And that was the perspective of the 1980s. That was after a 33-3 defeat, you know, when everybody said that was the end of the PNM. I remember Mr. Manning telling me there was an NAR debate, 33-3, and member for Couva South at the time, Kelvin Ramnath, said, "We'll grind you to the ground." And he put his heel and he rubbed it into a proverbial sand. He said, "We will grind the PNM to the ground." And here we are, a party of 63 years in office. And then came, to me, probably the most seminal document that was ever produced in the history of Trinidad and Tobago, Vision 2020. It was probably the most comprehensive policy planning and vision document that was ever prepared in the history of this country. While originally a PNM document, adopted by the PNM General Council and by a PNM convention. Because when PNM brings policy to the parliament and to the government, we have a process that we go through in the party, you know. We don't operate like the UNC where somebody prepare it and they just bring it and say that is UNC policy with no consultation from their membership in. Our policy documents are approved by General Council, and it must be approved by a convention. Since the formation of the PNM, we have held 35 annual conventions, which is one every 1.7 years. I don't want to speak on the behalf of the other parties. So while originally a PNM document, it was eventually articulated to the national population and was made into a national policy document. The team that did that transformation from a PNM document to a national document, was chaired by Atalok Jack. It included Dr. Ronald Ramkissoon, Dr. Terence Farrell, Dr. Rolf Balgobin, Mr. David Abdullah, Mrs. Nano Amgulam, remember that name? She was a UNC Minister of Public Administration.
They forget about that long time.
Professor Clem Sankat of the University of the West Indies. Dr. Botiwari himself. And if you listen to his presentation on this very motion in the House, you'll be surprised that is the same Dr. Tiwari who was principal of the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus. Mr. Vice President, we are in this position today to have to table a Vision 2030 document because as a society, we lack continuity. And I could always remember, one more time I will quote Mr. Manning, God rest his soul, that he used to always say that 3 areas of national life should always be apolitical. National security, foreign affairs, and energy. Because crime has no face. Foreign affairs, your relation with the international community doesn't see which government is in power. The United Nations, the OAS, ECLAC, and all these other international groups see Trinidad and Tobago. And there must always be continuation of policy in national security, foreign affairs, and energy. Because energy is so fundamental to this country's survival that if you flip-flop, you'll be going nowhere. And you will not attract the level of international investment that this country so dearly needs. And why I said I was sad today, it is because Vision 2020 was so fundamental to this country. This very parliament that we sit in today was part of the Vision 2020 vision. The rebuilding of downtown Port of Spain into a modern city. Check the government campus. I mean, for whatever happened and for whatever you will want to see, when you drive into the Port of Spain, despite the traffic, and you look at the skyline, you must say, I feel proud to be a Trinidadian. And I want to go on record today through you, Mr. Vice President. I think this was mentioned in the House, but I want to put it on the Hansard of the Senate. Why I feel so sad. Sometime around the middle of 2012, I was elected chairman of the PNM in 2011. I received a phone call from somebody in the Ministry of Planning and Development. And he said, Mr. Khan, what you doing now? I said, well, you know, I'm home. He said, can you kindly come to the basement of the Ministry of Planning? Because we have a truckload of Vision 2020 documents that we are taking to the dump. Let me repeat that. An officer of the Ministry of Planning and, well, what was sustainable development at the time? They didn't want to sustain the Vision 2020. Calling the chairman of the PNM and said, sir, we have a van load or a truckload. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was more a truckload than a van load of Vision 2020 documents,
Terrible.
including reports and CDs
Sad.
that they were about to dump at the beta. I had a Hilux at the time. I jump in my, first thing I do, I call Dr. Rowley. And I say, Chief, X, Y, and Z. He said, go immediately and collect the documents. I went, I didn't have a heart problem then. I loaded up the van myself. And came back. Today I can take you to the room in Balize house and show you where all these documents are stored. And if that was not a travesty to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, nothing else is. A document that took thousands of man-hours and study to produce, that included 600 citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And to quote former President Anna Robinson, some of the finest minds in this country participated in the preparation of that document. And they were about to dump it at the beta. And while they didn't literally dump it, because I saved it through the intervention of the Office of the Ministry of Planning, policy-wise, they dumped it.
That's right.
And that is something to be really sad about. And what makes matters worse, Mr. Vice President, they came up with an innocuous plan, using cliches without thinking through the process of development. It was called the blue economy. Remember that? The silver economy, whatsoever that means, and the green economy.
They're colorblind.
It was not a robust piece of policy document on development. It had no implementation plan. It was just using the cliches of the time. And they governed for 5 years. And the only economy they gave us was the yellow economy, you know. The yellow economy of waste, mismanagement, and corruption.
That's right.
And a vision document is instrumental to societies who want to develop. And again, I'm bringing a motion to Senator Joint Select because the Parliament on public policy needs to talk about it, needs to study it. And don't tell me it's P&M policy and all in charge of the government, so govern and implement the policy. No. I have a list of all the countries that have been engaged in some of these planning perspective. India has a Vision 2020. They may not accomplish everything, but India is going leaps and bounds ahead of the world today. Yeah. India is now surpassing China as the fastest growing economy in Asia. But Indian IT is second to none. There's a school called the Indian Institute of Technology that is harder to get in than MIT and Stanford combined. Even Jamaica next door has a Vision 2030. Malaysia has a Vision 2020. Saudi Arabia, I speak about Saudi all the time when I speak on energy. Saudi Arabia vision now is that by 2030 they will no longer be dependent on oil.
That's right.
Yeah.
So their oil production could go to zero and they will survive. Egypt, with all its challenges in the Middle East. And the country I have been looking at carefully over the last 5 years or so is Rwanda.
Oh, yeah.
Rwanda is one of the most progressive countries in Africa today. After suffering genocide, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, with Hutu and Tutsi killing each other with machetes. Rwanda, through good leadership, good planning, and a reconsolidation of its base, and settling more complex issues. Trinidad say they have an issue with East Indians and Africans. Rwanda had problem with Hutu and Tutsis, and they've solved it.
With leadership, good leadership.
With strong leadership. Good? And Rwanda today is one of the leading shining lights of Africa. Kenya has a Vision 2030. And Namibia also, down in what used to be called Southwest Africa. They fell under apartheid, under South African rule for some time. And Mr. Vice President, I say this thing in context because I really feel as a nation sometimes we're losing it. We are here as a government to govern for all the people of Trinidad and Tobago. All the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Because I will just raise it up a little bit. And let me quote from this one. So I have the right to raise the arm thing. It's not only for show.
He's quoting.
Nor are we an ordinary party in the accepted narrow sense of the word. That's Dr. Williams speaking at the National Convention. We are rather a rally, a convention of all and for all, a mobilization of all the forces in the community, cutting across race and religion, class and color, with emphasis on united action by all the people in the common sense. Quotable quotes. You know a great leader from quotable quotes, eh? And there's nobody in the history of this country that has more quotable quotes than the Right Honorable Dr. Eric Williams. So, Mr. Vice President, in closing, the Vision 2030 document is a further build-up of Vision 2020. It takes into consideration new developments and changes, especially with regards to the economy and technology in particular. And more importantly, it is correcting some of the areas where we felt we could have done better, because we are a party of continuous learning, and we are a government of continuous learning. And therein lies the reason, again, for a special joint select committee. Probably even more fundamental than the first one. Let the Parliament participate. Review the document, analyze the document, suggest changes to the document, suggest additional recommendations, say what you agree with, and say what you disagree with. Let it be known, because we are the people's representative, and this is public policy formulation. Because, Mr. Vice President, as a society and as a people, on fundamental matters like these, there is no room for division. Let me say it again. On fundamental matters like these, there is no room for division. Because united we stand, and divided we fall. So, through you, Mr. Vice President, and to my senatorial colleagues on all sides of this chamber, I commend this motion to you to set up a joint select committee. It is in the interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, the people we are here and we have pledged to represent. Mr. Vice President, I beg to move.
Honourable members, I shall now propose a question for debate. Be it resolved that a joint select committee be established to consider the draft National Development Strategy 2016-2030, Vision 2030, and be it further resolved that this joint select committee be mandated to A. Review and analyze the draft National Development Strategy 2016-2030, Vision 2030, B. Consider the recommendations contained in the draft National Development Strategy 2016-2030, Vision 2030, and C. Report its recommendations for the development of a National Development Plan no later than June 21st, 2017. Senator Mark.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I believe that this motion that has been piloted by my honorable colleague again represents a complete misunderstanding and almost misinterpretation of the political system and the political culture of our nation. Until the adversarial Westminster system changes, if you want to develop a communist state with a one-party system, let us go towards a communist state. So we'll have a common manifesto and a common program. But once we have a democracy, I am not going to remain here forever. I have to replace you there. And I cannot replace you. Well, Mr. Vice President, the competitive nature of the democratic culture is what keeps the society bubbling, alive. So we were there from 2010 to 2015. And you, because of false propaganda, misinformation, misrepresentation, half-truths, innuendos, you are now in government. So, Mr. Vice President, this Vision 2030 document that we are being asked by my honorable colleague that we should consider in the context of us participating in a JSC is even worse than the Welsh report. Mr. Vice President, how can a minister of government request of us to be part of a document or to be part of a joint select committee that will draw up a literal manifesto for the PNM? Name it what you will, Vision 2030. But this will be their manifesto for the next election. And we must be party to signing off on Vision 2030. So what is our relevance? What is the relevance of the opposition? Because if we are supporting the PNM Vision 2030, then we should become part of the PNM. That's right. We should form a communist party, become a communist party, and transform ourselves into a one-party state. That is what the PNM would like, you know. The PNM would like TNT to become a one-party state. That is what you would like. But Mr. Vice President, all these lofty things that the Honorable Leader of Government Business spoke to about the PNM evolution and the various documentation, People's Charter, Shagarama's Declaration, the imperatives of adjustment, that was William Dimas. He was the former governor. He authored that report. And Mr. Vice President, when he did that in 1983, by 1986, all the foreign exchange reserves of the country disappeared on the PNM. In fact, it was A.N.R. Robinson, when he became the Prime Minister, he coined the term, the dragons at our doors. He talked about the dragons. They left the country bankrupt, the PNM, in 1986.
More dragons.
And Mr. Robinson, may his soul rest in peace, had no choice but to go to the IMF. And we went through a structural adjustment program to bring Trinidad and Tobago out of the mess that the PNM left this country. So with all your perspectives, People's Charter, Shagarama's Declaration, imperatives of adjustment, perspectives for the 90s, and the so-called Vision 2020. And now we come with a new one called Vision 2030. But where is Trinidad and Tobago today, Mr. Vice President? With all these pretty and fanciful documents, where are we? Mr. Vice President, not only are the young people in our country in need of serious support and assistance to be rescued, but the country in terms of law and order has broken down. Law and order has broken down in this country. We are in a lawless state, almost heading towards anarchy and chaos under this PNM government. And we are being asked about Vision 2030. Mr. Vice President, what does Vision 2030 provide to hungry people, to unemployed people? And at the end of the day, Mr. Vice President, I want to tell you that how the system works in this country, we in the United National Congress will formulate our programmatic platform. We will go forward with our manifesto and program, and we will campaign, whether it is in 2020 or it is in 2019. And the people will make a decision whether they want to continue the PNM or they want to return to the UNC. But we cannot be party to a document. Sorry for displaying this document. It ought not to be displayed. How can we be party, Mr. Vice President, to an arrangement where my honorable friend is saying, become part of this program. Look at what happened in India and Malaysia and maybe Nigeria and Rwanda. They came together. Well, the culture of Trinidad and Tobago is not like that. We don't have that political culture. We can't invent something that we don't have. And unless, as I said, Mr. Vice President, and if you'd allow me to repeat, unless we have meaningful constitutional reform in this country, how are we going to have this sharing of a common vision? How can we have a sharing of a common vision without constitutional reform? So I am sorry to disappoint the leader of government business, but we will not be able to participate nor support this so-called Vision 2030 document, and therefore we will not be taking part in any JSC on this 2030 Vision document. We will not take part in that. We will not be party to that. Mr. Vice President, we're talking about waste. Imagine the leader of government business has the temerity to talk about when we left office, left it in yellow form, waste. That is your middle name. The PNM is waste. They represent mismanagement. They represent corruption in this country. So you come in, and that is what happened, you know, Mr. Vice President, between 2010 and 2015. They engaged in what is called spiritual terror.
What is that? What is that?
So, Mr. Vice President.
Mr. Vice President, on a point of order, 46-6. 48-6, sorry.
Honorable Senator, continue.
So, Mr. Vice President, when we are talking about Vision 2030, and we are being asked to be party to a JSC to promote this particular pie in the sky arrangement, which will never be achieved. Never be achieved. Mr. Vice President, we have to be very practical and objective. We live in the real world. We don't live in a la-la land. We live in the real world. And the real world does not allow us, Mr. Vice President, to be party to this kind of arrangement.
I'm not interested.
I have already stated that the United National Congress will not be party to any JSC on Vision 2030.
I'm not interested in the development.
I am interested in getting rid of the PNM. That is what I'm interested in. That is what I'm interested in. Mr. Vice President, what is the reality facing us? We are being asked to take part in this JSC, Mr. Vice President. But what is the reality facing TNT today? What kind of confidence do the people have in this society under the leadership of this government? Mr. Vice President, crime is out of control in this country. Not even the gentlemen of the cloth are safe in this country. Where have we reached, Mr. Vice President? This is courtesy the People's National Movement. And they are coming today to tell us, Mr. Vice President, rather than come with a crime plan to deal with the issues affecting the society today, they are telling us, Mr. Vice President, let us focus on a JSC with a Vision 2030 document in 2030. Under the PNM, maybe 90% of the people will be dead under this PNM. Unless the people get organized quickly and demand fresh elections in this country so that they can make a choice once again, Mr. Vice President, we are in trouble. So crime is out of control. We have a collapsing economy. Mr. Vice President, under this economy, unemployment, we heard a minister telling this country, there's only 5,000 people unemployed. How can you be real? 5,000 people unemployed since the PNM came to office? Mr. Vice President, there are tens of thousands of people who have lost their jobs. Look, I read only in today's Express, Atlantic LNG is about to retrench over 50 permanent workers via a system of VSEP.
You know, VSEP.
VSEP is voluntary separation. It is a sophisticated form of retrenchment. My friend does not understand IR, but it is a form of retrenchment in industrial relations. Voluntary separation. Because if you do not go voluntarily, the acts will come down. That is what they'll do. You remember Carney with voluntary separation? Yeah. And at the end of the day, what did Rahal did? Rahal. He licked up everybody. He got rid of everybody. So, Mr. Vice President, let us be realistic. Mr. Vice President, in this country today, it is more difficult to do business. In 2012, the ease of doing business out of 190 nations, we came to 63rd. Under PNM, Patrick Manning, we were almost 98. You know where we are today under this new PNM?
Tell them.
Around 97. Look, I have these statistics here. You want to tell me I'm wrong? I have these statistics because I know people like you would have challenged me. So I brought these statistics, Mr. Vice President, with your leave. I will tell you where we are today. Right? In 2008, right, 2009, under PNM, it was number 81, the ease of doing business.
Not 90 something.
Yeah, but 81. Under UNC in 2012, it dropped to 63. Today in 2016, it is 96.
What was it in 2015?
2015 was 92.
And 2014?
It was 85.
Under you, it was sliding.
But what the point I'm making to you is that under the UNC, we were able to bring down the doing business in this country was 63
Point of order.
in 2016, in 2012.
Senator? What's the point of order?
Could you give a clarification of where source of the document?
Members.
Clarification.
Senator Sturge,
No.
can I speak?
Not at all. Imputed improper voting. Nonsense.
Member, is there a specific point
Some
of order?
source of the document.
No, not an explanation, a point of order. In number, standing order, Senator. Thank you. Continue.
No, Mr. Vice President, I understand my colleague and so on. Yeah, you know, I understand what he's trying to get at. But Mr. Vice President, the source of the source of the information, you can Google www.tradingeconomics.com and you will get the table. Okay? I understand what you're trying to do, but he just couldn't understand the standing orders because he never studied it. So I understand your situation. So, Mr. Vice President, how can we really seek to talk about 2030 when it is so difficult to do business in this country today? You have a country, Mr. Vice President, where the government is borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. We're in a country today where the government is just taxing and taxing and taxing. So today, Mr. Vice President, the debt to GDP is close to 62%. And it is rising. And as you know, Mr. Vice President, the threshold established by the OECD countries is around 60%. They said that is a reasonable level. If you go beyond 60%, you are in trouble. And the PNM has taken this country in less than 20 months from where we were. I think it was close to about 50%, 46 to 50% debt to GDP, to now 62%. And you are telling me about Vision 2030? Let us be serious. Let us get real.
I have no vision by 2030.
Mr. Vice President, we have a situation where the education system in our country has literally crawled to a halt. The quality of education is deteriorating. And they have closed the gate.
I have been giving you quite a bit of leeway in relation to context and the points that you're developing. I want you now to, as moving forward, bring it back to the bill, the motion, that deals specifically with setting up a joint select committee as it relates to the Vision 2030 document. So can you tie it back into the motion as you're moving forward, making your points, please?
Mr. Vice President, I couldn't agree with you more. Mr. Vice President, I want to re-emphasize the importance and significance of this particular perspective. And that has to do with the fact, and I want to drum this point home to the leader of government business in particular, the Parliament is not responsible for drafting policy or giving policy direction to the government. That is the responsibility of the cabinet. So when they come, Mr. Vice President, with a document and asking us to be party to a document that deals with policy perspectives in terms of economic, national, strategic development and a vision for 2030. Mr. Vice President, that is the business of the cabinet, not the parliament. I do not know why the honorable leader of government business does not appreciate that. So you are bringing a document to us that we cannot accept. And our responsibilities as parliamentarians do not permit us to participate in. Because we understand the dangers of that. Is the government seeking to undermine the parliament? Is your strategy to undermine the parliament? I don't believe the government would want to do that. Mr. Vice President, take the whole question of the JSC, and this matter being referred to the JSC. Mr. Vice President, today as we speak, because of the haphazard, chaotic planning by this regime, we are forced to meet twice a week. You know why? Because the government, Mr. Vice President, failed to provide us here with what can be called a parliamentary calendar. The leader of government business could have been working very closely with the clerks of the both houses. Leader of government business here, leader of government business in the other place. And they could have formulated a parliamentary calendar. So we would know, Mr. Vice President, from as September last year to September of this year, how many bills we will have to deal with, the times we are going to deal with these bills. We would have known how we are going to deal with our JSC meetings. Mr. Vice President, this government is trying to impose another JSC on our backs. And you know what is taking place, Mr. Vice President? That situation is affecting our scheduling of meetings of the JSC standing committees that are established to scrutinize and to keep the government in check. So the question that has to be asked, Mr. President, is the government actively seeking to undermine the parliament by creating these new joint select committees that are duplicating the work of the existing joint select committees and at the same time causing chaos with the parliamentary agenda and schedule of our JSC meetings. So for instance, take an example, Mr. Vice President. On June the 21st, because of the chaotic arrangement that we have arrived at, because of the haphazard planning on the part of this government, you have two meetings taking place the same time on the morning because there is no planning taking place. Everything is clashing, Mr. Vice President. No, I'm saying that you all are overworking the parliamentary staff because of the chaotic and the lack of a parliamentary agenda. So, Mr. Vice President, these are ad hoc committees that have been established by this regime. But you know what is also important, Mr. Vice President? The leader of government business must understand that the parliament, I am a champion of the parliament. No, I am a champion of the parliament. And I'll always defend the parliament and the people. Mr. Vice President, we have limited resources. in terms of staff to support any additional JSC. I want to tell the Honorable Leader of Government Business that this JSC that you are proposing that we must establish to look at Vision 2030, tell us where the staff is going to come from to do that piece of work. You cannot have a parliament operating, Mr. Vice President, in this ad hoc manner. So it occurs to the government that they want to entrap the opposition. So they have a report on health. They say that we're going to establish a JSC on health. Then they come now with a JSC on Vision 2030. And who do you think will chair those meetings or those committees? Either the leader of government business or the Minister of Finance. Or they might put the Minister of Health to chair the Health Committee. So again, Mr. Vice President, so whilst ministries and departments are planning and implementing measures to cut expenditure, Mr. Vice President, what they expect to take place in this Parliament? How is Parliament to respond to the whimsical behavior of this government? So the government just so, Mr. Vice President, and say, Parliament, we are going to establish 2 more JSC. No consultation. Mr. Vice President, you have been witness to situations where the Honorable Leader of Government Business will rise here and simply tell us that we are meeting we here on Tuesday. He rises and he says we're meeting on Thursday at 2:30. No consultation whatsoever. The Honorable Leader of Government Business does not know if there are 3 Joint Select Committee planned for that day. That does not occur. It doesn't matter. So what they are doing by their haphazard approach to the establishment of JSCs is that they are undermining the life and the parliamentary work that is taking place in the Parliament. That is what they are doing. And how can we support that, Mr. Vice President? We can't support that. And this is a challenge that we have. And I want to tell you, Mr. Vice President, that there is no serious democracy. Even the world leading democracy, the United States of America, through their presidential system, they don't operate like that. There's a strict separation of powers. And you have a battle between the Democrats and the Republicans for power. You think there's any child's play taking place? You think the Republicans telling the Democrats, come, let's go and prepare something called Vision 2030? They don't engage in that. It's war. They want to get rid of Trump. Right now, the Democrats are planning how to get rid of Trump. Whether via through impeachment or someone, because they want to get back into the White House. You think they can have a common manifesto? And that is the pinnacle of democracy after the United Kingdom, the United States. And it's a battle royale. Mr. Vice President, it became so serious at one time under the former President Obama that the Congress withhold the budget and they closed down America. They shut down the state, the United States of America. That is the power of the Congress. I want that same power to be given to the Parliament. We want the Parliament to have that power. If the necessary and the PNM is involved in waste and mismanagement and corruption, we shut you down. So, Mr. Vice President, let us be serious. Let us be serious. You cannot expect us in the Parliament on the opposition benches. We are campaigning outside here. We had a meeting last evening in St. Helena. We are telling the people in St. Helena and different parts of the country, it's only a matter of time before we face the polls, Mr. Vice President.
46-1.
Honourable Member, as much as I understand the context of the point that you're trying to create, again, tighten it up just a little bit, talking about the GSC, Vision 2030 going to the GSC. And as you're developing that point, tighten it up and move along.
Yeah, so Mr. Vice President, all I was indicating is that when we go to the public and we engage them, we present ourselves as the alternative government. We give them an alternative vision. So if we are going out there to give an alternative vision to the people of the Republic of TNT, how can we justify, Mr. Vice President, being part of this? We can't be party to this. We have to establish our own manifesto, and you must be able to develop your own manifesto. You have a manifesto, Mr. Vice President. The PNM have a manifesto, but I never saw in their manifesto any document that they talk about 2030. Nowhere in the manifesto of the PNM did they mention that they are going to develop Vision 2030. I haven't seen that.
It's just to outdo Manning, you know.
So I do not know where this thing came from. And all of a sudden, Mr. Vice President, we are being told that we must be party to this. Mr. Vice President, the Minister, the Honorable Leader of Government Business is the Minister of Energy and Energy Industry. I want to ask him whether in this Vision 2030 document, is there any consideration for renewables? Apart from just this solar energy item I saw, is there, for instance, an organized policy to deal with renewables for the next 20 to 30 years? My honorable colleague mentioned Saudi Arabia, a country that is drowning in oil, and they are talking about renewables. Mr. Vice President, we should be heading in that direction as well, working towards reducing fossil fuels and getting involved in what is called alternative energy consumption as well as production, whether it is wind, whether it is solar, whether it's tidal, whether it's thermal, hydro, whatever. These are some of the areas that we have to start thinking about in terms of reducing our dependence on energy consumption in the area of fossil fuels. So I do not know, I haven't seen in the so-called Vision 2030 any kind of vision in an organized and systematic way for the development of renewables. I haven't seen it.
I'm sure you read it.
Well, maybe it's there, but I haven't seen it, Mr. Vice President, right? So I just throw that out for the consideration of my colleagues on the other side.
It's like Trump.
Right? So, Mr. Vice President, we want to make it very clear to the government that there is need for this government to recognize that the trajectory that they are on right now is wrong. They are not going to arrive on the right road because they're on the wrong trajectory. And therefore, Mr. Vice President, I want to appeal to the Honorable Leader of Government Business that it does not make sense pursuing this matter like the health report. I believe that this motion is misplaced.
Should be taken to Balize House.
I think this motion should be withdrawn and taken to where it belongs, Balize House. This is a Balize House motion. Take it back to Balize House, right? But you cannot tell the Parliament of the Republic of TNT to help you, You want us to help you remain in power when our objective is to get you out of power.
Senator, you have 5 more minutes.
Mr. Vice President, could you imagine that? They want us to help them to remain in power when our objective is to get them out of power. That is unbelievable. And you expect the honorable leader of government business is smiling because he understands what is the trick involved in this thing. It is a trick. But I want to disappoint him, Mr. Vice President, that we will not buy that bag of tricks from the PNM. We will not participate. You will get no nomination from the United National Congress or any member on this side taking part in that travesty you want to get involved in. We are not taking part in that. That is for you and you alone. And Mr. Vice President, I believe, in closing, this document is going to end up where it rightfully belongs. I think that the honorable leader of government business will have to get a new picture because this document might end up in the dump. Because no serious party, worth its salt, will become party to that kind of arrangement that you are talking about. And we will not be party to that, and I made that abundantly clear. So don't come and ask us for any nominees, because there will be none. We will not be taking part in this matter. And once you understand that, you'll get the message. Mr. Vice President, it was a great honor and pleasure allowing me to advance the perspective of the alternative government, which will soon be the government as we move towards getting rid of this albatross called the PNM. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President.
Honourable members, it is now 4:45 and time for the tea break. This House will now stand suspended until 5:30.